Congratulations, Senator. You've passed the first bill this session. So.
1 month after the start of the 2023 legislative session, the first bill was passed in the Senate today. Good evening and welcome to Lawmakers on day 11 of the Georgia legislative session. I'm Donna Lowry in Atlanta. This week, the first of what could be several bills on the continued effort to legalize gambling dropped. On the show, we'll have lawmakers from each side of the aisle talking about the chances of any of them passing. We'll look at why something dealing with sports betting has the best odds. Also, the Senate Majority Caucus lists education as a top priority, and the chair of the Senate Education Committee will be here to tell us more as we look at efforts to increase literacy. But first, here's Rochelle Ritchie with tonight's Capitol Report.
The day started out with some controversy in the Senate. Former Republican Senator Kelly Loeffler visited the chamber as part of a Senate resolution commending her organization, Greater Georgia Action Incorporated, which helps register voters.
I'm just really grateful that you're here rolling up your sleeves, being that voice for Georgians from Bainbridge all the way up to Blue Ridge, from Camden County to Catoosa County. Your work is making a huge difference. And that's in stark contrast to Washington. I have worked in Washington. I see that contrast. And I'm really grateful for the strong conservative leadership of Governor Kemp, of Lieutenant Governor Jones. He's going to do an incredible job for y'all. I'm really excited to see that. And for each of you, I thank you for doing the work that you do every day.
But before the resolution was adopted, Senator Josh McLaurin objected.
They want to register and engage more voters, and the way that they describe this task is, we know that millions of voting age residents are still not registered to vote, many of whom support the conservative values. And then they say, by identifying and engaging these conservative-leaning Georgians and registering them to vote. And then they proceed with the rest of their mission statement. Democrats like voter registration. We have organizations that do the same thing. We register voters too. But this organization does unquestionably explicitly identify its goals as to register conservative voters. In that way, it is part of the game. It is part of the game that we all play, the electoral game. And while it is fully appropriate, in my view, for members of the majority to stand in these locations and to tout the values of a former U.S. Senator, who, by the way, I stood and clapped for to respect the office, and to tout the values of an organization that has partisan aims, my very simple objection to you this morning is that I do not feel that that is appropriate for a unanimous consent calendar.
The resolution was pulled from the floor and sent to the Rules Committee to be vetted. Then the Senate got down to business by presenting Senate Bill 11.
This bill simply allows the Georgia Bureau of Investigation the ability to proactively, either independently or with our other agencies, both local and federal, to go after and investigate crimes relating to terrorism, nuclear, biological, chemical, cyber, and domestic.
It was the first bill voted on almost a month after the session started and was passed 49-3.
Congratulations, Senator. You've passed the first bill this session. So.
And coming on the heels of Governor Kemp's remarks yesterday about sex trafficking prevention, Representative Deborah Bazemore revealed a new video featuring herself, the governor, Atlanta Mayor Andre Dickens, and actor and producer Tyler Perry on the importance of fighting human trafficking.
I have been working with the First Lady, Marty Kemp, for about 3 years now on human trafficking. My district sits closest to the busiest airport in the world. And there's a recipe right there. So I joined forces with her, and we came up with a PSA that's going to be played in the airport.
The House kicked off this morning with the recognition of Black History Month, citing key figures in Georgia's history.
In 1973, at the age of 35, Maynard Jackson became the first black mayor of the city of Atlanta, where he served 3 terms. Today, the busiest airport in the world bears his name, Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport.
Also, Representative David Knight, chairman of the Appropriations Committee on Higher Education, welcomed the Atlanta Consulate General of Japan, stating the significance of Georgia and Japan's 49-year partnership.
I can tell you that strong partnerships like those for our Japanese companies that come in here and are great partners in Georgia. Many of you have these Japanese companies that are actually in your district.
Our cooperation today is unprecedented, rooted in our shared value, shared vision of a free and open Indo-Pacific and a peaceful and prosperous world.
That is today's Capitol Report. I'm Rochelle Ritchie.
Rochelle, thank you. One additional bit of news from the Capitol. We have 3 newly elected Republican members of the General Assembly. In the runoff for State House Seat 7, held by the late Speaker David Ralston, Johnny Chastain bested Cherie Ralston, who sought the seat her husband held that covers Gilmer and Fannin counties. In Senate District 11, which covers parts of South Georgia, former State Representative Sam Watson of Moultrie, who won 76% of the votes in a 3-way race, Watson resigned from the House to run for the Senate seat. Chaz Cannon won as the only candidate for Watson's former House seat in District 172. And Republican Holt Persinger will face Republican Charlie Chase in the campaign for House District 119. And the other election from yesterday will lead to a runoff in Barrow County in northeast Georgia. So a lot still going on. Now, let's get into gambling, at least talking about gambling. Joining me are Democratic Representative Billy Mitchell of Stone Mountain and Republican Senator Billy Hickman of Statesboro. Welcome to Lawmakers. Thanks so much for being here, both of you. Yesterday, 10 Georgia senators introduced SB 57 to legalize retail and online sports betting. And Chairman Hickman, you were one of the lead sponsors on this bill. So tell us a little bit about it.
Yes, ma'am. Well, thank you for allowing me to be here. Yes, ma'am, I was the lead sponsor. It's a combination of sports betting, which includes horse racing. And it seems like this has been moving for many, many years, and I know Mr. Mitchell, Representative Mitchell, can address that, but we're getting closer and closer. Sports betting is legalized in various states around here, and a lot of people bet using Tennessee, and in fact, I use a person up in Tennessee to help me bet on some sports. And so we're just trying to get some of that money to Georgia, and the same thing, horse racing, we talked last year, would be a $1 billion a year economic impact, employ about 8,000 people. So it's a combination of two together.
Yeah, so we've been here before. You've been on this show to talk about this before. How does it look this year? Let's start with sports betting in particular, and then overall gambling.
Well, I will tell you, I think there's an appetite for sports betting and other forms of gambling for sure. The reality is Georgians are gambling. The lottery is gambling. I'd rather see, if they're going to gamble anyway, I'd like to see it be regulated by Georgians for the benefit of Georgians. Right now, the resources that is spent on gambling goes out of state, in some cases even out of the country. So I'd like to see us get a better handle on that, making certain that Georgians are protected when they do bet on sports. If they have problems, we have written in the bill where there's resources available for those who have problems. So I think it's an idea whose time has come. The Hope Scholarship is certainly in need of some additional resources to do all the things that I will say that the Democratic Caucus wants to do, like to replenish Hope, to put it back into place what the original Hope was intended to do. And certainly I think we have an opportunity to also shore up Medicaid as well.
So nothing specific on where the money would go at this point, right? There's still talk. Isn't that still in the works?
That is true. There's some who say that the resources should go to the lottery so that they can manage it here. And then there's probably as many ideas as what should happen to the money as there are legislators. However, I do believe that it is an idea whose time has come.
So last year, the Senate was where things kind of died, where the bill died down a little bit. So I think it's interesting that 10 senators are signed on to this bill.
Well, also in our bill, before I answer that, in our bill, all the proceeds go to the lottery.
So it would be? It
would be a lottery, and we're very interested. I know we're going to address this in our second segment. We're very interested in fully funding pre-K and then and other forms of education. Yes, it did, but there's been some changes. You know, when the retired Chief Justice came out a few weeks ago and made a statement that it would not have to have a constitutional amendment. And so our horse racing part of the sports betting bill is a fixed odds betting and not a pari-mutuel betting.
Okay, explain the difference for those of us who don't understand that.
Okay.
Fixed odds. So I've never done the gambling on the horses, so I don't know.
Fixed odds basically right now is what sports betting is.
Okay.
Okay. Which means that whenever you make a bet, the odds that you have at that time are the same type of odds that will pay off when you win.
Okay.
Pari-mutuel betting is the more money that's bet on something, the lesser the odds go down. So you can bet. You can go to the window and bet on a horse and odds be 4 to 1. I go to the window and bet on the horse and it's 2 to 1, but the horse wins at the time the win, whatever the odds are there,
okay,
would be what the payoff would be.
Okay.
So fixed odds would be more conducive because people understand that whatever those odds are, when you buy that ticket, that's what the payoff is, and that's what other form of sports is now.
And you're saying the horse betting would also fall under the bill that you are sponsoring.
Oh, yeah. Right now, the bill, and we may look at some breaking out, but right now the bill is a combination of sports betting. But of course, horse racing is a form of sporting.
Okay. Representative Mitchell, what about the other forms of gambling, and what about the House? Are you guys going to do a companion bill? What can we expect?
Well, there again, I do believe that we have an appetite for other forms of gambling as well. I believe that other forms of gambling would certainly require a constitutional amendment, therefore 2/3 vote in both chambers, which essentially means that the people will decide. It would go to the voters and they would decide if they would like to have gambling in their particular community. I think it was smart to do these bills, these efforts separately. I think that online betting has a greater chance of passing. But I do believe that we will deal with those issues of gambling, casino gamblings. I don't even think we call them casino gambling anymore. I think we call them destination resorts.
Yeah.
I do believe that we'll deal with that issue this session as well.
Yeah, so, you know, he did mention former Supreme Court Chief Justice Melton making the decision that for sports betting, that you don't need the voters to vote on an amendment to the Constitution.
And I agree with that.
But for everything else,
it is clear that we, particularly if the resources we decide that are derived from these gamblings are not managed by the lottery. There are those who believe or would like for resources to go to other efforts, Medicaid expansion and the like. If that is the case, then it will most certainly have to have a constitutional amendment, ergo a 2/3 vote.
Okay, so I've got to ask, so one of the things, critics of gambling always cite the crime as one of the reasons that they are against it. And so we've seen this rise in crime, and the big focus this legislative session has certainly been on crime. So how would you answer that question from people who say, well, we have gambling in the state, crime will increase?
Well, I would answer that question by saying gambling is already here. And it's full-fledged. I mean, people doing, I told you just a few minutes ago, that I've got some connections where I can bet in other states. So it's here. I think if we put it in, as Representative Mitchell said, it will be regulated. And if it be regulated, you can put the stops in place to reduce the crime, reduce the other forms of illegal stuff against it. So right now, it's wide open. There's no regulations on anything that's going on.
Yeah. You're feeling the same way about it when it comes to that?
Donna,
this is
a historic show because look at this bipartisan agreement.
Look at this.
We're all together on this.
There's no question about it. I think Senator Hickman is absolutely right. I think that this is an issue. I don't think there's anything inherently criminal about gambling. I always find that if you find a community that's void of economic opportunities, there's likelihood of more crime in those areas. This would actually increase economic opportunities, increase employment, increase contracting, which I think overall is a good thing.
Yeah. You're right now, I think the other thing you talked about bipartisan, but both chambers looking at this too. So and for the Senate to come up with it so early, the governor has spoken out that he kind of has an appetite about this too, right?
That true.
makes a
that's
difference.
That's our understanding. That's our
Yeah.
understanding,
So you're feeling pretty good about it this time around?
I'm cautiously optimistic.
Hey, yeah. What about you?
I think I'm perhaps a little bit more than cautious, but I am optimistic about it. I just believe that with the employment opportunities, the contracting opportunities, and what this will do for Georgia in the state. You know, I was at a hearing just the other day, and the Georgia lottery, once again, let me emphasize, which is gambling, in a state that supposedly doesn't have gambling or is against gambling, is making record numbers in the profits that they're making with the Georgia lottery, in the tune of billions. So there's no question about it that the citizens have an appetite, and I think that we should bring that to Georgia where it can be regulated for the benefit of our citizens.
We talk a lot about jobs in this state, especially this legislative session. What are your numbers in terms of what jobs we might see because of that? Not as much from sports betting, I understand.
Yeah, well, certainly not as much as from sports betting because that's done online, but the tech opportunities are just amazing. I talked to some of the vendors, and what they're doing now is giving scholarships and opportunities for college students to learn the industry, and many of them are being recruited before they get out of college because this is a technology-driven industry. So we're talking about, you know, Georgia is a great place to be with tech companies moving here in such vast numbers. This will add to that.
All right. We're going to have you back on probably to talk about this as things get closer to crossover day. You're going to stick with us to talk a little bit more about the education aspect to all of this.
Yes,
so
ma'am.
coming up, we'll dig deeper into some of the ideas to help education in Georgia.
Lawmakers is made possible by Georgia Farm Bureau. With over 80 years of helping everyone understand the importance of agriculture in our state. After all, ag is Georgia's #1 industry. Food and fiber production represents over $74 billion in output of Georgia's strong economy. The Georgia Farm Bureau legislative team works to represent producers across Georgia at the state capitol during the session and year-round. Georgia Farm Bureau, the voice of Georgia farmers.
Here's what's new this month with Passport.
You make a good team.
As long as we're together, it's perfect.
Dreams do come true. Hey, lad?
Seems they do.
Something deeply dangerous is happening here. This is just beginning.
These and all your favorite shows are available with Passport. Support your PBS station and stream more with Passport on the PBS app.
My heart is racing right now.
Fasten your seatbelt. This season we have 21 incredible guests.
It's wild.
It's really something. And there are so many highlights. I feel like a time traveler.
You're uncovering the truth.
These are consequential things.
Yeah.
Mind blown. What do you have? Spies working for you? How did you find this?
Oh, look at everybody.
You have a DNA cousin.
Oh my God!
That's Bill Hader. You know him?
Of course.
I wish my mom could be here to see this.
What?
That's very moving, actually.
Your ancestors came on the Mayflower.
I've got history. I feel the presence of all these people.
What a treasure.
Those are some of the incredible stories of the new season of Finding Your Roots.
Tuesday on GPB.
Welcome back to Lawmakers. I'm Donna Lowry. Bills looking to improve education outcomes in Georgia continue to flow under the Gold Dome. We're going to talk about them and other issues to improve learning in Georgia. Joining me once again is Republican Senator Billy Hickman of Statesboro, and he also chairs the Senate Higher Education Committee. And we also have the Executive Director of Voices for Georgia's Children, Dr. Caitlin Dooley. Her organization advocates for laws and policies to improve the lives of children. Welcome to Lawmakers. Thank you so much for being here. So Chairman Hickman,
Thank you.
so for the last 2 days, you've co-chaired joint hearings of the Senate Education and Youth Committee and the Higher Education Committees. You got together. And so tell me why you did that and why that was so important.
we have been working over the summer, as we stated earlier. We met with 58 different school superintendents over the summer, and 5 different big meetings. And the literacy rate, we don't have a literacy problem in Georgia. We have a illiteracy problem. Okay, and if you look at the numbers that are published, is that children in the 3rd grade, the average literacy rate of children in the 3rd grade in the state of Georgia that are reading on 3rd grade level is 43.59%. So you got 56% of the children in Georgia are not reading on grade level in the 3rd grade. Now, what does that mean? That means a lot of times it gets a little bit better, sometimes it gets worse. And so if we can't create a workforce for our state if our children can't read. And so that's why we're on this so hard.
And we know with the 3rd grade that's so crucial because kids up to 3rd grade are learning to read. After 3rd grade, they're reading to learn. So if you don't know how to read by 3rd grade, you can't learn anymore, right?
Well, we learned today by a lady that spoke that if a child is not reading on grade level in the 3rd grade, they have a 4 times greater chance for dropping out of school.
Wow. Wow. These are numbers you've heard before with your organization, and you've attended at least one of the days of the hearings. Tell me your thoughts on what you're hearing.
Well, it was not new news, and some of the efforts that are underway are exciting. So, for example, we recently had the Boost grants, which was mentioned by Superintendent Woods. That was $85 million that came through with ESSER funds, which are recovery funds from the federal government, and that helps with after-school and out-of-school learning. So that was exciting for us to see that they were advocating for more after-school and out-of-school learning. Another thing that they were advocating for was the expansion of pre-K and kindergarten, which we are excited to see. We want to see kids getting the needed services prior to entry into K-12. So in addition to all of entry into pre-K and entry into birth through 5 education systems, a lot of those systems also offer things like healthcare and nutrition, physical activity. So we want to see those things happen.
Yeah, I know. I want people to know your background a little bit. You used to work for the Department of Education in Georgia.
I did. So I was the Deputy Superintendent for Teaching and Learning under State School Superintendent Richard Woods, and took on this role as Executive Director for Voices for Georgia's Children 4 weeks ago.
Just 4 weeks ago? I didn't know that.
So, so under my leadership, we were granted over $179 million for literacy from the federal government, and that's called the Comprehensive State Literacy Development Grant. Prior to that, we were awarded $65 million for literacy. That was called the Striving Readers Grant. And I wrote both of those grants, and we were awarded because we were really characterizing the needs of children in Georgia, not just literacy needs. We need to have formative assessments. The superintendent talked about that, and the expansion of the Beacon formative assessment in grades 1 and 2, which is really helpful. Teachers need to have that formative assessment information in order to make instructional decisions, and not all school systems can afford to have that. And then we also were touting the need for evidence-based practices. But in addition to that, we were touting the need for community partnerships, because the communities have a vested interest in the well-being of their children. So through those grant monies, we were able to seed the money at the district level, but then build community partnerships at the district level so that all communities could pull together for the good of children.
Yeah, I want to get back with you on some of those things and how it's going to happen. But I wanted to talk to you about. She mentioned pre-K and kindergarten. We talked earlier about gambling and the possibility of sports betting. You would, with the bill that you sponsored, the money would go into pre-K. You really want to see pre-K shored up, and you had some statistics about close to you. Talk about that.
Yes, ma'am, we did. In our sports betting bill, all the profits or the fees and all would go to pre-K. In a county next to me, Cannon County, I asked the superintendent, how many children in this county qualify for pre-K? He said 140. I said, how many are in your school? He said 110. I said, where are the other 30 at? He said, they're at home. I said, why are they at home? He said, we have no money for them for pre-K, and there's no church-related pre-K school and all that. So those children are a year behind already, the ones that do go to pre-K versus the ones that do not. Then you turn around and take that along with the minimum age of 6 to be in school, and a child, if they're not 6 years old, they don't have to go to kindergarten. So you theoretically could have a child 2 years behind when they go into first grade. And so that's one of the big gaps that we're trying to fill.
Yeah, so pre-K in this state has been around since 1993, and so it sounds like it's time to make sure that we're taking care of all the children who are eligible in this state.
Yes,
yeah. Let's talk a little bit about how that grant will, you're going to go to the school districts with this grant, and what type of literacy education will we see take place?
Well, the grant was put in place in 2017 and then again in 2019. So it's underway now, and all of the evaluation records are online under L4GA. If you just Google that, you can find those evaluations. And what we found was that by adding this money to the district's bottom line, we added about $500 per student, and we prioritized districts that had a high poverty rate. And in those districts, we've beat poverty. In other words, we forecasted what the students would achieve, and then given what the correlations are to poverty, and then what we got out of our formative assessment results from the school districts. And we have over 9,000 students who are reading above grade level now that would not have been had they not had this money coming into play.
And once again, early learning, so that we're talking of the younger ones.
The grants actually focus on the community. So the monies go to the district level, but the district has to have a literacy plan, and that plan has to go from birth through 5, through elementary, through middle school, and through high school. And they're supposed to also work with their higher education partners.
Yeah. I want to, Senator Hickman, before you go, I want to talk about the importance of why this is so important right now when we talk about workforce issues. Literacy issues, or as you said, illiteracy issues will hurt Georgia if we don't get kids where they need to be ready for the workforce down the line.
Well, as I stated earlier, our primary focus is to create an educated workforce. And we're learning through talking to teachers and all that our graduation rates really don't reflect our reading rates. And that's what we want to try to get a correlation. Our graduation rates all across Georgia are 85 and 95%, but our children can't read. And if you talk to the teachers, K through 12 teachers, or if you talk to the university teachers, they'll tell you these children are having trouble reading. So we can't create a workforce for Georgia with all the jobs we got if our students can't read.
You agree with that?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that their kids are graduating and yet still not able to read to the level they need to leave. Yeah.
Well, it's harder. It's actually harder to read right now than ever before in our digital environment. I mean, if you think about and write as well. We have so many more requirements for reading and writing because we're all in a digital space where that's part of our everyday in a way that it wasn't, 50 years ago.
So it's harder for kids to teach them, and it's harder for them to actually understand what they're reading too.
Yeah, yeah.
Explain that a little bit.
Well, the requirements of reading online are, and I was a professor at Georgia State before this, so I don't want to get too academic with you. But the requirements of reading online are different than requirements of reading in a linear format. Like if you were to think of a printed newspaper and how linear that is compared to when you're reading online and you're having pop-up screens and then the editorial level of what was going into print and text has disappeared as more people have access to putting print into text. So we have to have students who are better at evaluating.
We're running out of time. We'll have to have you back to talk about it again. Thanks so much for being on the show, and thank you for everything you're doing down at the Capitol. That does it for Lawmakers today. We'll be back tomorrow for Legislative Day 12. Good night.